In this WellSeeker Pro training video, I'll be introducing the chart properties and chart default features available within the program. These options allow us to customize the various plots to include all the necessary information required. For the purposes of this clip, it is assumed that the user has a basic understanding of the software in terms of layout and functionality, and if this is not the case, it's recommended that you watch some of the other introductory training videos before you watch this one. We'll start by taking a look at the chart defaults. These options are accessed via the Plots menu, which is only available when you have a plan or a survey open. The purpose of the defaults is to give the user more consistency when opening the different plots. So for example, at the bottom of the Plots menu options, we have got some options available here for our line colour. So we can select the survey line colours, the actual well line colours, plan line colours, and the principal plan line colours. This means that when you open any plot, if you have a survey, a normal plan or a principal plan offset, each time they are referenced and displayed on a chart, they will always be a given colour. So surveys and actual wells will be red, basic plans which are not principal will be green, and a principal plan will be blue. This just means it's very quick and easy to see when you open your charts which well is which in terms of, is it a plan, is it an offset, or is it a principal plan? And that's selected via the Plots menu from the bottom. We also have within the Plots menu a specific chart default section. Now everything that's available within this chart default is something that can be manipulated within the chart directly via the chart properties. But really, the benefit of the chart defaults means that every time you open a chart, the settings or the majority of the settings are exactly the way that you want them to be. Which means that every time you open up a chart, for example, it's set with the default style that you want, whether that's no style or whether it's dark line. Every time you open it, it will be whatever the default is set. For example, the default grid option. So do you want to show your various grids on each of your charts? Do you want to have X and Y grid lines? Do you want to extend the tick marks? Do you want the grid in front? Do you want it to be bold lines? And the size and the thickness of the lines as well. In terms of the series style, so this refers to the lines themselves, so the plotted lines in terms of the actual well, the survey, the plan, or the principal plan. So in this case we've got medium lines selected, but we have various options so these would be solid lines, these are dashed lines, and these are dotted lines. In terms of the border style, you can have no border, thin, shadow, or inset. And if you have got default grid options selected up here, you can also then select what the minor and the major line colours will be. These next two options are really useful. So the show offsets on open. If you have offset wells selected and these are associated with your survey or your plan, when you open up a plot, it will only initially display the reference well, and you can go in here and you can turn the offsets on. But with this default, if you have this selected, every time you open up a plot, if there are any offsets selected, they will show on opening, which is a very useful feature to have enabled. You can turn that off at any time, but it just means that in most occasions when you have offset wells selected, you will want those to be displayed on your chart. So that's just a very useful option for you. Another option would be the show targets on open. So when we are in a particular chart, if we have targets associated with it, and we'll come and we'll look at the chart properties later on in the clip, but from here we can turn the targets on. So the targets are displaying, but every time we close and reopen the chart, we would then have to turn those targets on. If we select the show targets on open to be yes, If you have targets or a lease line reference, they will open and they will display on your plot each time, which again is very useful. It means every time you open the plot, you don't have to keep coming in to turn these things on. We can select our tick marks, so with our major or our minor ticks, so these are the lines on your grid, you can have these selected to be every 50, 100, 200, 500, 1000, or auto. Same for the minor, although the increment is smaller. In most cases, auto is what you would want, but if for any reason you want them to consistently open with the same deviation between lines, then that's something that you can select. Do you want to show your casings on open? So again, in the same way as the offsets and the targets, if you want to have your casings on all the time, that can be done through here. And we have an option about our casing symbols. Do you want the default casing symbol to be the standard casing symbol or a dot? Chart font sizes can also be selected, so select the font that you want, and it will then give you the ability to enter this in manually in here. And again, that can be changed from within the chart properties themselves. This just means that every time you open it, it will give you the values that in most cases you want. Do you want to include a legend? If you have geosteering zones set up within the properties of the actual well, then you can have these selected for the colours, and also do you want to turn them on by default. Tolerance circle settings. So within the plan well properties and actual well properties, you have an option to enter tolerance circle values, and this just allows you to determine whether these are turned on by default, what colour you want these to be, and what line style you want them to be. The 3D chart has quite a few additional settings that are completely independent for it, and these do not affect any of the other plots at all. So we've got 3D plot centre at top of well, so when you centre in on the survey, it will centre at the bottom of the well. If this option here is checked, it will always centre in at the top of the well. You can choose the size that you want the survey spheres and the fly down spheres, line thickness, work site settings. So again, this will just can be changed within the chart properties themselves, but if you have a specific setup values that you want, you can enter them in here and they will always be utilized every time a new chart is opened. Do you want to show the rig on the plot, show critical point targets, critical point target radius, show lease line curtain, center on survey text, and center on survey? So all of these options specifically relate to the 3D plot defaults. Projection settings. So again, for things like bit projections, you can select the color that you want them, and you can also select to have these either turned on by default. And these specifically relate to the directional drilling dashboard and the plot that displays within it. Lease line and hard line settings. So if you have any lease lines or hard lines that are being displayed, again, you can select the color and the style and whether or not these will be turned on by default. Show lithology lines on open. So this option means that in the section view plot and in the 3D plot, which are the only plots that you can actually display the lithologies, if this option is checked when you open, and if you have lithologies on, they will be displayed. Show principal plan on separation factor plot. So this specifically relates to your separation factor plot. If you're in a survey and you have a principal plan selected as the offset well, If this option is selected, then it will show on your separation factor plot. If this is not selected, the principal plan will not show up. Show axis scales, again on any of the plots that you open, if you want the axis scales to show, having this checked, they will show as default. Show plan points on open, show well names, show tether lines. These options, again, depending on whether they're checked or unchecked, will show the well name. You will have tether lines on, or you will have the plan points on open by default. The final option here is only show principal plan. If you are in a survey and you have lots of offset wells selected, there is the ability to select an option that will allow only the principal plan to be shown. This can be selected within the chart properties themselves, but if this is checked, by default it will only show. So even if you have other offset wells selected and you turn those on, if this option is checked, it will only show the principal plan. Okay, so now that we've gone through the plots defaults, so within the chart defaults section here and this options further down below, we'll now take a look at the chart properties themselves. Now, to access the chart properties, you have to be in a plot of some description. You cannot access them from anywhere else. So for the purposes of this, I'm just going to open a plan view plot to begin with. Now that I'm in my plot, there are three ways that I can access my chart properties. I can either access them through the plots menu, I can access them through the toolbar along the top, or the easiest way to access them is directly from the chart itself by double left clicking, and this will open up our chart properties dialog. So the chart properties dialog has all of the available options for your plots in one place. There's an awful lot of information in here, and it will take a little while to get used to where everything is and what everything does. Within the chart properties, there are one section in particular over in the top right hand side. This is very specific just for the 3D charts, so is not available to any of the other plots. There are also a few options that are only available in certain charts and not others. So for example, the lithologies. We're in a plan view plot at the moment. Lithologies will only display on section view and the 3D plots, so we can see that these are not available for us to select. So for the purposes of this training video, we're going to go through these options one at a time and just show you what they do and how to use them. So the first thing that we'll start with is, up the top left hand corner here is the depth labels. And I'm just going to select just one individual well to show you this on, which is a survey. And you can see to re-access this again, as I mentioned, just double left clicking on the chart opens it up. So this is probably the easiest way for you to access your chart properties. So the depth label option on the top left hand side here allows you to put labels on every standard interval as you select. So here we're looking at putting measure depth labels on every 500 foot. You could also do it with TVDs if you wish, but for this purpose we'll use measure depth. And if you want, you can also include inclinations and azimuths on these labels as well. You can also include a label at each survey point. Generally this would be very, very crowded, and you're probably not going to do that. So here, for our example, we're just going to select interval 500. If you want, you can also narrow this down further and select the start and stop depth for your labels. For the purposes of this though, we'll just stick with 500 and we'll show our inclinations and azimuths. And once you've made your selection, you hit OK. If I zoom in, we can see we've got labels every 500 foot measure depth, which shows our inclinations and our azimuths. If I want to remove those, I can just uncheck the depth label, we'll uncheck our inclination and our azimuths, hit OK, and they are now off of our plot. The next thing that we'll look at is the labels section, and to look at this I'm going to come out of my survey and I'm going to open my plan, and again we'll look at the plan view plot for this one. So we've got a few options for our labels. We can do well names, annotations, plan sections, plan points. So the plan points is already checked, and those plan points are these little green options that we can see here, and those just symbolize the various lines on the plan. So where something changes within the plan, so each of these lines here is represented by one of these green points, and if I uncheck this and select OK, you can see that those disappear. One thing to point out is that at the moment, as a default, I have got labels have tether lines selected, so every time I open this, my labels will have tether lines. So once the labels are there, if I was to move them, we will see that there are tether lines. That can be turned off at any point. So if I check well name and we put on annotations, we hit OK, we have got our well name here, and we've got our annotations as well, and these can be moved. The size of these, in terms of the font size, can also be adjusted. I just skip ahead a little bit down to the font sizes. This is down to the label size. So if I change this to say 80, you can see that the label sizes change, and you can manipulate this and move these to whatever way that you want. And these will be the same color, certainly initially, as the well profile that they're coming off of. So this is a principal plan, so these are staying blue. If I check annotation details here, what this does is it now gives you the details of the specific annotation as well. So the measure depth, the TVD, the inclination, the azimuth, and the vertical section, and it will give you that for each one. Uncheck these. You can put on here casing symbols, and we can put on plan sections as well, and that will give us our casings if we have any. And again, in the same way as our plan points, these plan sections, just to a certain degree, they annotate your plan points. So they just tell you what's happening. So they look at the planning method used, and it will specify. So dogleg tool face, 10 degrees, 144.85 tool face offset. Hold measure depth, and then you've got your inclination and azimuth as well. If your plan or your survey crosses a lease line, if you select the lease line intersection, then a label will appear at the point where the lease line intersection happens, and it will give you the measure depth, TVD, inclination and azimuth of the point that you pass the lease line intersection. And that's the only time that that will show up. It's only if, number one, you have to have a lease line on your plot, number two, you have to be physically crossing that lease line at some point. And I can show you that if I open up this survey, which I have extended to cross the lease line, and we can see that it's crossing the lease line here. And if I pop in lease line intersection, you can see it's telling us lease line intersection details along with where it actually physically crosses. We'll now take a look at the section view plot for this survey. And again, we'll just look at this with the single well. And if we go into properties, we can see that within the labels option, the lithology options are now available where they weren't available before. So we can put on our lithologies, lithology line, lithology TVDs, hit OK, and we can see we have our lines, the names, and the TVDs for each of those. Moving forward again a little bit, we talk in this section about label color properties. So we could select lithologies and lithology lines, and we could make these a specific color, and it will change those colors on here for us. If we now look down at some of the other options, so our label general properties, so again, these are just for our labels specifically. So in italic or bold, if we have these checked, they will be in italics and bold. Labels have tether lines, we talked about this already. and allow labels to be zoomed. This just relates to when you're zooming in and looking at the labels. Geosteering data. This is another one that specifically relates to the section view plot. These will all be greyed out other than in the 3D plot or in the section view plot. So if you have target zones, top target zone and bottom zone entered in your actual well, you can display them on there and you hit OK. And we can see that these have now shown up, and if we zoom in, we can see the top and the bottom target zone and the target zone itself. Down the bottom we've got font sizes. We've already mentioned label sizes, so these directly affect the labels that you include, things like the well name, lithologies, plan points, etc. But we also have axis label size and grid number sizes. So if we just make this a lot bigger just to show you, there's your axis label size and your grid number size as well. So you can manipulate all of those. I'm just going to close this chart now and I'll open the spider plot. So within the chart properties now, we're going to come up here and start looking at the TVD slice. Now the TVD slice is something that can only be accessed within the spider plot. And what this allows you to do is allows you to select a TVD, and the program will then remove everything above the minimum TVD and below the minimum TVD on the plot itself. So if we change the minimum TVD slice to 1000, instead of starting at 0, if we hit OK, it will now start at 1000, which we can see it's also filled in the value here at 1000 as well. So if I back in here, this time we'll change it to say 5000, and we'll also change the maximum TVD to say 8000. When you do that, you then end up only displaying any of the wells that are on the spider plot will only be displayed between the TVDs that you have selected in the TVD slice. So in our case, it's between 5000 and 8000. The label color properties, so these are again specific to the labels and they're fairly self-explanatory. Labels as they are normally displayed will display the same color as the wellbore that they're associated with. If you wish to overwrite that, you can overwrite that by selecting the relevant checkbox and the color that you want, and you can do that for the depth labels, well names, tether lines, annotations, lithologies and lithology lines. We now just reset this back to what it was before, and I'll zoom in a little bit. This section here for the wellheads and templates, if we check the wellhead symbols, it will give us this little green circle which will represent our wellheads. And we can see it's at the start of our survey lines and our plan lines, and in this case this is a wellhead that doesn't have a well coming from it, either that or it's a vertical well and you can't see it. So these symbols can be quite useful when you have just got vertical portions of the well and you're looking at it in the plan view, because in the plan view a vertical well is either going to not show up or it's going to be a very small point. So the wellhead symbols can be quite useful in that respect. If we select templates, if you have a slot template entered, and I've got a slot template in here, this was just a random one that was put in here for demonstration purposes, it will display on here as well. And we can select the slot and the well names and zoom in, and that gives you the slot and the well names. Now this option is only available in the plan view plot and the spider plot. Section view and 3D plot is not available. The other options that we've got here is the inner and outer tolerance circles. So if you have an inner or outer tolerance circle defined at your plan level or at your actual well level, you can show it on the plot. So these are just circles that are drawn around the wellhead of a given radius as entered by the user. And that covers the TVD slice down to the wellhead symbols. For the error ellipses, we will look at the plan and we will look at the plan view plot. So if we display our ellipses of uncertainty onto our plot, we can see that they will just generate as a red colour on a specified frequency. Within the chart properties, we have a few different options to do with the error ellipses. So the first one is the plot frequency. So if we reduce the plot frequency value from 5 to say 1, we'll notice that we have a lot more ellipses generated. So the lower the number, the more frequent your ellipses are going to be. At the moment, and as default, it's selected the error is the same line as the series, and that just means that it will be the same type of line. So if it's a dashed line, it will be a dashed line. If it's dotted, it will be dotted. Solid will be solid, etc. You can override this and you can select something different if required, and it will just adjust those for you. And the last thing that you can do is to select the errors the same as the same color as the series. If you have a lot of offset wells and they're all different colors, then this can be very helpful because it means that you can very clearly see which ellipses relate to which well plan or survey. And that covers your ellipses of uncertainty. If we now go up and we'll have a look at the options up here, which are offset well labels. So to do that, we'll turn on some offset wells, and here we've got a principal plan which is blue, we've got another plan which is non-principal is green, and we have a red actual well or a survey. And if we just enter, for example, our well names, we can see that we have a well name for each of our wells displayed. And this option up here relates to the offset labels. So we have well names selected, and because we have well names checked in the offset well labels, they are displayed on the offset wells. If we uncheck this and hit OK, it will only display on the reference well. And that is the same for your depth inclinations, azimuths, annotations, and casings. Within the default chart options, and as it comes with the software, surveys and actual wells will be red, principal plans will be blue, and plans will be green. This can be adjusted in here to change these particular colours. If you have a number of wells selected and you would like them all to be different colours, there are a couple of ways that you can do that. The first one is in the series style, you can come down and you can select the relevant well, you can change the colour, and you can also change the line style. But every time you close the plot and reopen the plot, this will have reset back to the default well colours. Another way of very quickly doing this is just to select to randomise the offset colours. So if I click this and hit OK, it will then change these to random colours. Now in this case, you may find that they stay the same colour, but you will find that every well that you have selected that's offset will be a different colour. And that can be really handy when you've got quite a number of offset wells selected. So if I just uncheck that again and hit OK, they will go back to the default colours that they were before. We'll now take a look at the graph colours. So this is where the user can specify the different colours of the grid lines, the background, the planes, and the text. So you can adjust the minor and the major grid lines to be a specific colour. At the moment, the minor grid lines are not displaying. If you come up to the top right hand side here, we have got some grid options. So this relates to the grid and how it's displayed. So at the moment, by default, we have Y major and X major. If we put on the minor axes and we select to make the major grid lines thick, you can see that these have now been displayed in here. We also have background bands, which are kind of masked with the colour in here, but there would be background bands between each of the major grid lines. Down here we've got our background, so this specifically is the background of our 2D plots, so the section view, plan view, any of the other ones that are two-dimensional. X, Z and the Y planes specifically relate to the 3D plot, and again you change the colour of those and they will change the background. And the text relates to the text along the X and the Y axis, and that can be changed from within here as well. While we are on the subject of the various graphs options for displaying, below the grid options we also have some options relating to the style, the border and the legend. So there are various different styles available. And these can all be selected from this drop-down menu. You can select to have a border, the relevant border that you would like. So if we just say a thick line, and if you want a legend, you can also have that in as well. So I'll just close this plot and reopen just so that we can start with a more clear plot to begin with. The next thing that we're going to look at is the chart grid. So the chart grid allows the user to manipulate the minimum and the maximum X and Y axis values and to fix the scale. So if we select the X axis and we select -3000, maximum 3000, you can see that that will allow us to change our minimum and maximum values. We can show the scales, which now show on here. One thing that should be noted is in any of the main user interface charts, it is possible to skew the aspect ratio, and by that I mean have a different scale on the X and on the Y axis. In the wall plot composer, this is not something that you can do. You have to maintain the aspect ratio within the wall plot composer, and as a result you will not be able to achieve something like this where we have got two different scales for the X and the Y. You can also select to have the scale per centimetre opposed to per inch, and if we just manipulate this as well, and 800, and if you wish you can also fix a given scale. You can make an adjustment, fix the scale and hit OK. So just under this we have got our options for our major and minor tick values for the X and the Y axis. These are set to auto by default, and at the moment we have got a major division of 500 and this is split up into hundreds. If you wish to override this, you could put it in something like 1000 every 200, and it will then adjust the divisions and it will also adjust the major axis for you as well. This option here, auto max min scale to include targets. Sometimes when you start planning initially, if you have just a vertical portion of the well and you maybe have a target which is way off, it may not be showing on your plot. And that's because we focus specifically in on the trajectory of the plan of the survey that's been selected. If you cannot see a target that you know should be there, if you check the auto max min scale to include the targets, it will make sure that it adjusts automatically to show the target on there without you having to manually do that. This is really only ever a consideration at the initial stages of planning when you maybe either haven't done the plan yet, or you have a vertical portion of the well and you have a target that is quite a distance off, in which case having this checked will allow you to see where your target is. If it's not checked, you may be zoomed quite closely in on the wellhead, in which case you won't be able to see it. If we do have targets assigned to a given plan or a survey, then these can be displayed on our plots as well. Again, within the chart properties, at the bottom right hand side of the dialog, we have our target section. So the first thing is, at the very bottom, we can see all of the targets that are associated with our plan or survey. It will not just show targets, but it will also show lease lines, and that will be defined by a little check here. Or if it's a hard line, there will also be a tick in the hard line box as well. If we select here to display the targets, let's just get rid of this, then this will display our lease line as we have one and any targets that we have. So there's one target there. We can also select to include the target name. So there's the two targets that we have. And we can also select to include the lease line names. If we have drillers targets, we can include those. And then down the bottom, we have the ability to manipulate or adjust the line style and the colour of any of our given targets. So for our lease line, we can change the colour and we can change the line style. We could do the same for these, but these are just point targets anyway, so they won't make any difference. So there's the adjustment we can see with our lease line. And if we wish, we can select what we want visible as well. So if I just uncheck the lease line, it will disappear as well. And all of that, anything to do with lease lines or targets, can be adjusted and addressed in the bottom right hand side of the dialog. We'll now take a look at the 3D chart options, and in order to do that we need to first open a 3D plot. So with the 3D plot, the first thing that we'll do is we'll centre in the surveys and we will go to the top of the well, and we can see that there is a rig, and this rig is specific to the 3D chart options and it will only show on the 3D chart. Of course, if we uncheck this, the rig then disappears. If we now look at some of the other 3D chart options, we can define the size of the survey sphere and the fly down sphere here as small, medium and large. We can also check on the work site and the compass, and we can choose the colours, and if we have a work site selected, we can select the radius and the increment of the particular work site. So if I hit OK, what we can see is these circles that are purple and clear, these represent our work site, and this is a 50-foot radius, and each one of these bands is 10 foot. And when this is on, it also displays high side. Around about the outside here, we can see that we have our compass. And again, these can be turned on and off independently of one another. And if we just turn these back off again, we can see, if we start moving up and down, this little purple sphere here is our fly down sphere. We can change this to say medium, and you can see it is a bit larger. We can also show our critical point targets. Now for a plan, your critical point target is going to be any line within your plan, and you can select the colour and you can select the critical point radius. If you hit OK, and we move up here a little bit, we can see that for each of our critical points, so these spheres in green, and you can see the radius of the target which has been drawn round about it. So the last option in the 3D chart list is the Centre on Survey text colour, and if we just change that from black to red, you can see that that affects the colour of the text, and this text shows up when you have Centre on Survey selected. Change that back to black. The final thing to mention with regards to the 3D charts is, I mentioned previously about the survey spheres. Now the survey spheres will not display unless you have survey points selected from the labels section. And when you have that selected, it will display all the various survey points on each well bore. Now, for our selected well, it's not a survey, it's a plan. So instead of showing survey points, it will show the interpolated points that have been used to create the wellbore, which are every 100 foot or every 30 metres, depending on the unit sets that you have selected. That now covers everything within the 3D chart. One of the last things that we've got left to look at within the chart properties specifically relates to the travelling cylinder plot. So in the centre we can see we have the travelling cylinder reference, and we have an option of north or high side. At the moment we can see that we're referenced to north. If I select high side, it changes our reference to high side. We just change that back and we randomise our offset colours. In this example, I'm in a plan, I have offset an offset survey, and I have also offset the survey that directly relates to my plan, so the well that is being drilled at the moment. And if I turn on my ellipses, the ellipses are only going to show on the survey that does not relate to my plan. If, however, I want to show my errors on my reference well, and by this reference well, what we mean is if you're in a plan, you have selected the survey that relates to the plan as an offset well, that is what we're classing here as a reference well. So if I select to show errors on the reference well, they will now show on here. Now the final thing that we've not yet covered in the chart properties is this section here, which relates to projections. So when you append a projection to any survey, it will show up on the chart in green or in whatever colour you have got selected here. Green is the default. These additional two survey projections specifically relate to the directional drilling dashboard, and they will not show up on any of the other plots. So now that we've covered everything in the chart properties dialog, the last thing to mention is that by right clicking anywhere on the chart, we have access to an additional context menu, which gives us access to some of the same options that we have available within the chart properties. The only thing to point out here that is not available within the chart properties are these options at the bottom, and they relate to additional axes, whether it's an x-axis at the top, y-axis to the right, or the option here to have an additional x and additional y, which will mean that you will have axes all the way around. So if I check x-axis on top, y-axis on the right, we can see that it moves it from the bottom and from the left across. But if I right click and select additional x and additional y, it will just give me the axis all the way around my plot. Another useful feature which can be accessed from the context menu by right clicking on a chart is the export dialog. Now the export dialog allows the user to export the chart that you're in either to clipboard, or it can be exported to a file and saved as a PNG, a JPEG, a BMP file, or it can be sent directly to the printer. So in this case, if I was to say, go to the clipboard, if I hit export, this has now been saved to my clipboard, and I can go to Word, Excel, PowerPoint, I can put it in an email, and I can just Control-C or right-click and paste, and it will paste the plot exactly the way that we had it on the main dialog. Now the final thing that I want to show you with these charts is not so much one of the chart properties, but it is a feature that is available within the charts themselves. And that is the screen reader, which is available from the shortcut toolbar along the top, and it's also available from the plots menu. And if you open the screen reader, first thing you'll see is this little dialog appears, and it will tell you the east-west or the north-south value based on where your cursor is pointing. And if you zoom in using the scroll button on your mouse, you can then left-click anywhere on the chart, and that will anchor your tether line. And then as you move, now that we have created an anchor point, we can see that the distance and the angle is now also populating. So this is another way on any of the 2D plots for you to quickly work out how far away you are and the angle and also the coordinates. And in order to turn this off, all we do is we just select the screen reader again and it will just disappear. That's us now going through the various chart properties and chart default features within WellSeeker. We're now going to take a look at some questions. I'm going to read through these questions one at a time. Once I've read the question, if you pause, try to answer the question yourself, and then once you have an answer, hit play and see if you have the same answer as I did. So question number 1. How do you access the chart properties? So firstly, you need to have a plot open, and then you can access the chart properties from either the Tools menu, the shortcut toolbar, or by double left clicking anywhere on the plot. Question number 2. Is it possible to set a default where any offset well will be displayed automatically when a plot is first opened? So the answer to that is yes, and this is selected via the Plots menu, Chart Defaults. Question number 3. How do you add an additional X and Y axis to the plot? By right-clicking anywhere on the plot, the option to add an additional X and Y axis will be available at the bottom of the context menu. Question number 4. Do you need to have a plot open to be able to access the Chart Defaults menu? No, but you do need to have either a plan or a survey open in order to be able to access this menu. So we now have an end of training exercise for you to do. And for this exercise, if you open any plan or survey that includes targets, lease lines, casings, annotations and lithologies, and offset at least one other plan or survey, and then open any of the available plots and have a play with the various chart properties and defaults. Opening up a plan with all of the, or a survey with all of these things assigned means that when you turn various labels on, you have data there to show. So it's just going to give you a feel for the various chart properties that are available, and you will start to become more familiar with this. And if at any point you become stuck, refer back to the video for a refresher. This now concludes our WellSeeker Introduction to Chart Properties training video.